Okay, fantastic. Good morning to everybody who's taken the time to join us. We've got participants from across the globe, as always, and majority of us from South Africa. Super excited to be hosting this session today. As many of you know, we have been announced as the top CX offshore destination as South Africa, and it is the second year in a row, so we're exceptionally excited about that. But with winning comes responsibility, and that responsibility is how is it that we're going to be running our operations, servicing our clients and customers, and growing our opportunities both locally and globally. The challenge always is we do not know what we do not know. So BPESA is exceptionally excited to be working with our member partners, TKG, the Knowledge Group, where they're going to spend some time over a 4-part series unpacking this monster of engaging with the international community and really sort of drilling into what does best practice look like, what are clients looking like, how best can we run and manage our operations, how best should we be engaging with the international community, how do we support what is the new requirements from a global audience. So a lot to really drill into and unpack over a series of engagements coming up. So starting off today, we are hoping that you are going to make use of the chat box to put in any thoughts, any questions that you have. The more thoughts, questions, views that you pop into the chat, the more that the team can respond to what it is that you're thinking, where your challenges are, areas of success that you've seen. But this is really going to be a great way of uncovering the excellence that we know exists in South Africa and within your operations, but really just assisting you to hone what it is that you are doing. And then literally getting us to the scale that we know that we need to get to and that we can get to. So I want to say thank you very much to the team who has helped to put the session together. So to Charlotte, Eloise, and Natasha, thank you very much for coordinating and supporting. And then I'm exceptionally excited to be passing over to our presenters for the series of events. So that would be Dave Rumble, it will be Joel Walker, and then our guest, Adrian Graciani. Dave, at this point, I would like to pass over to you so that you can kick off and start educating us and telling us what it is that we don't know. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Tracy, and welcome to everybody. Great to have everybody along this morning. So I think just probably worthwhile just giving a bit more context from a TKG perspective, just in terms of what we're trying to to build with BPESA in terms of this knowledge partnership. So we're looking at creating a series of masterclasses that will help inform the industry more broadly, just in terms of those capabilities, and exactly as it describes, it's a knowledge partnership. I think Tracy obviously has alluded to it. We're looking for this to be, kind of an informal exchange of information, so more of a conversation than a lesson, a kind of a preaching lesson. So please add your questions, anything into the chat. Hopefully, we'll try and address some of those through the process. But if you've got any burning issues, or if you've got anything that we say that is probably overtly provocative, or you completely disagree with, feel free to jump onto the Q&A session. So look, from a knowledge partnership perspective, I think there's a series of things that we've got in terms of an ambition for this. Firstly is for TKG to get a better understanding of the marketplace and to build a connection, particularly with the smaller providers, the SME providers within the South African market. We're very knowledgeable about what South Africa has got to offer, most favoured offshore destination. So it's great to be engaging and accessing a kind of a wider marketplace. So I think from a BPESA and from an industry perspective, what we're trying to do here is through this dialogue is to emphasise and raise the profile of capability, particularly that SME capability, raise skills, raise awareness, and obviously in an attempt to try and raise the standard through understanding, how source markets behave in terms of the way in terms of the way that they're sourcing. All of this hopefully contributing to, to building capability in the marketplace. So stepping in, so who's on today? So who's on this session? So I think we've got, I'm going to say the three musketeers, but we've got Anton Deck of outsourcing. So Joel is a fellow co-founder in TKG. He is responsible for all of the stuff that goes into making sure that the operations and all the procurement and digital sourcing activity works well and runs smoothly for us. He's an industry raconteur. He's one of the guys that's been around the industry, knows the industry exceptionally well from a procurement perspective, started life in operations and uses that as a basis. So having a very, very good understanding of operations and how that affects the purchase cycle, and particularly when you're starting to build partnerships. So really coming at it from a delivery and execution perspective. He's a cyclist and lives in Luxembourg, based in Luxembourg, and as I say, is a raconteur. So he's made the great leap from corporate world into joining a startup where we're hoping to challenge the industry. So alongside Joel in the conversation today is Adrian. So Adrian is responsible for all of the services, the GBS services category within the second largest mobile network in the world. So we won't name them for obvious reasons. But, real in-depth experience in source markets and what's going on currently. So really getting into understanding the impact in the marketplace of things like ESG, and how, more importantly, smaller suppliers might seek to engage with larger corporates and larger organizations and the dynamics. So feel free and push questions into Adrian. Like Joel, Adrian is based in Luxembourg, but where their journey started slightly differently. So Adrian started life in kind of sales and client services. So he's made the leap. So this is a poacher turned gatekeeper. So he understands all the dynamics that go into selling and building relationships. So from that perspective, I think we've got either side of the coin. So, ops and kind of relationship and sales. So really good, really good speakers today. So hopefully you'll use the opportunity to engage. I'm a co-founder of TKG, chair. So I'm the part-timer. So hence the reason why you've got me as a kind of a compere today. And for those that do or don't know me, I think I'm now classified as a veteran, so I'll leave it at that and you can make your own judgments when we get to it. So I'll just give you a little bit of a context about TKG, because I think it's worth just familiarizing you, because most of you won't know what the business is and what the business is about. So at its core, TKG is a challenger. It's a startup business and we're a digital sourcing company. And really kind of trying to challenge the industry in terms of, the traditional methods of sourcing and procurement, where a third party or a consultant or even a broker is used to try and facilitate a sourcing relationship. So we're looking to try and, declutter the market and allow buyers and, suppliers to more effectively engage, but using a kind of a community sourcing and digital sourcing approach. So the business is essentially built around three disciplines. We have an information capability where we hold information on suppliers within the GBS sector, the broader GBS sector around the world, and we support a number of different marketplaces in providing and backing up that information. So that's, kind of, yes, as you might imagine, a kind of almost like a directory. And then when organizations are looking to, to access information about the industry or about a particular supply base in a particular marketplace, then we open that up to them as a means of securing the knowledge about that marketplace. So information. The next leg is the stuff which really is, the kind of the meat of the business, which is where we allow organizations to engage through a digital sourcing platform to run the entire end-to-end digital procurement and sourcing processes, all the way from expression of interest, all the way through RFI, RFP, through BAFO, and we allow that all to be administered digitally and for the client to do that. So whether it's a project for 2 people to do some content moderation, or maybe some inside sales, all the way up to some very large enterprise deals where we're running programs with 6,000 and 7,000 FTE across multiple partners. So the infrastructure allows us to manage and operate quite large, what we call ecosystems of suppliers in building out that capability. So, and as I mentioned, there's no brokerage fees, there's no commissions. The whole idea of this is to facilitate, engagement between the two sides of the marketplace. And then the last element of what we do is we support clients where they need assistance or they need the ongoing management of service. So this is where maybe they don't have the expertise or they want particular insights into a particular marketplace, like South Africa as an example. And we provide those through a buy, build, operate approach where we can bring in resources and our own team to help guide the client and or the supplier into making the right decision about developing a partnership. So that's a little bit about TKG. If you've got any questions about the business, feel free to throw those in, and we'll obviously try and take those. So I think the best way to probably describe what we do, we're a bit like a dating platform. I think the most popular dating platform I understand in South Africa is called Badoo. And just like them, the principal thing is what we're trying to do is through data is verify profiles to match to organizations together more effectively. So that's the basis of the business. So getting back to today, because that's what you're all here for, I'm going to hand over to my fellow speakers shortly. We're going to go through a series of themes. So we've tried to group this masterclass around a couple of kind of guest discussion themes, discussion topics. And so each will be led by Adrian and or supported by Joel and vice versa. And the idea is obviously to use those themes. Please pose your questions in the context of those themes, and then we'll come back and loop round at the end to go through the Q&A. So without further ado, I will hand over, I think I'm handing over, he says, to Joel and or Adrian at this point. You guys ready to come on?
Hey, hello, Dave.
Right, you're on.
Well, so first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation of today. It's really a pleasure to be here, as it was a pleasure to be in precisely South Africa not long ago and having the chance to seeing in first person what is going on there. So today, what we want to talk about firstly is about beginning the cycle. That first page we have on understanding buyers' needs, which would be my case here, offering the right product and appreciating the buying cycle. So what drives the decision initially to go with one supplier or the other? I think one of the things we need to understand is that needs of buyers are not static. They fluctuate quite heavily over time. So sometimes that might be due to external inputs or shocks, like legislation changes or new products being launched. Sometimes it might be due to internal reasons, budget cuts, OPEX cuts, or changes. But the thing is that whatever your needs are today might be very different tomorrow and might be the same they were initially the day after again. So consider that the needs are fluctuating quite a lot whenever you approach buyers, right? The price is an important thing, but it's not the most important thing, I would say. Now, when it comes to offering the right product and service, once understood the needs, hopefully the buyer has a clear view on the needs. Once understood the needs, we need to find out what exactly it is, and why the buyer wants to outsource this product instead of doing it himself, right? So we have make versus buy conversations, we have in-house solutions, we have shared services, and we have GBS solutions. So the first thing to find out is, are you offering the right product or the right service at the right point in time, right? So same with the previous bullet point where we said we need to understand the needs. Also, the product might change over time, and also here it might be quicker than you anticipate. So my point will be flexible when you go into any conversation, and be able to adjust, because you might go in thinking, I'm going to sell product A, and you might be selling product C or F. And that, I think, is one of the big assets of SME corporations or companies is the flexibility on adjusting. On the third point, so when it comes to appreciating the buying cycle, this seems like the most obvious one, right? We need to consider the cycle from the very beginning, which is create the awareness, to the very end, which is create the real purchase or even repurchase the initially already purchased goods. So I think at some stage, the earlier the better in reality. You obviously need to get part into this if you want to sell to a corporation. So we will see this a little bit further, and Joel will speak about it on the following slides. But the most important thing here, obviously, is having the right contact, and having the right contact at the right time into the corporation to be part of the general awareness process before the RFQ really starts. Once the RFQ has started, I would say it's nearly too late to jump on the train of the buying cycle of this precise product. Joel, you want to comment anything on this?
I think you've touched on it nicely. We'll go on in a second to expand around how provider organizations can enter that, some tips really on entering that cycle. But I think you make a couple of key points I'd maybe just underline. The two most important of which are, I think, the evolving needs of buyers and how they may change over time. So even if you've been told no once, or you're sort of let down once in a procurement event, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's it for that organization, as they're very fluid, big corporations, and as you say, their needs can change. And I think the second sort of key point I'd underline is that the need for a consultative sale. So the earlier that you're engaged in a discussion with that organization, the more likely you are of coming through a procurement event successfully, just simply because you've been involved in shaping the discussion in some way. So that might not come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I think it's a point worth underlining. Maybe.
Can I just ask a question, just in terms of the, I guess for the folks here, just in terms of the length of the buying cycle, yeah. So I guess, for context here, so getting into that, kind of today and tomorrow and planning for the future, how long would you say, kind of a typical corporate buying cycle might be for a project in our sector?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It depends a lot. It depends a lot if it's the first time you source it, or if it's a repetitive sourcing. So if we would go and say, let's create a call center in South Africa, then probably the process would be somewhere between 12 and 18 months as a full process, since the idea comes up until we really take calls on the ground would be somewhere between 12 and 18 months.
Yeah, so I think, just to emphasize really to our audience, that I guess patience when you're getting into understanding a buyer need, and just be mindful that they whilst we might need to be fast and flexible to respond to the opportunity when it comes in as an inbound query, actually the procurement process, there's a lot of work that's gone into developing a business case very often, particularly when organisations are looking at entering a new market like South Africa. So that whole kind of understanding the shape and flavour of that sets the context then for understanding potential buyer needs of the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's so the pure RFP or RFQ process maybe is a month, meaning from launching the RFQ until we get the quotes in and then evaluate the quotes. That might be a month of process. But before this RFQ is being launched, there might have been probably already 6 months since we said we could do this. How could we do this? With whom could we do this? Where could we do this? And so on. All the due diligence that had been done before the RFQ might be 6 months. And then you have another, 6 months of until you implement what you finally decided.
Yeah.
From the sales part, often what we just see is we see an RFQ coming in that usually has 2 short deadlines. In fact, I need this quote by Friday. But as you rightfully said, the whole process is just much larger.
Yeah.
Has to do with lots of compliance standards, policies that apply within big corporations. Everything needs to go through tax, everything needs to go through data protection officers, etc. So that makes it quite lengthy in general.
Yeah. And then I'm going to pose a question quickly just to Joel on a slightly provocative basis. Look, where Adrian is, there's a very solid procurement and sourcing process. Decision makers are involved. There's a lot of diligence and thought that goes into building requirements. How often, Joel, just in terms of really getting down into the meat of it, how often are customers clear about what they're buying? In terms of issuing documentation. You can be open and honest now, but yeah.
I think it's very rare. And I think, some of that time that Adrian talked around before an RFP goes out to market a lot of that is in coordinating or choreographing a diverse set of internal stakeholders, all of whom will have very different needs or views around what's required. So it's very rare that what's awarded is what was initially envisaged, in my experience. And as I say, I've been doing this a while now, and I think there are organizations that can help you frame what it is that you're looking for and going out to market so that you save time and effort. But really, you have to spend that time up front in choreographing and coercing, coordinating, whatever phrase you choose to use, at the front end of the process, to make sure the clearer you are on your message into the market, then absolutely that resonates loudly out into the provider ecosystem, and they're able to respond. If you're unsure or uncertain, that this is a professional provider community, they can see that in the documentation.
Yeah,
they'll sense that during any engagement sessions. And ultimately, those are the sorts of projects that get stalled for a long time. So you've got a lot of time. The time that you spend up front, you save at the end. In terms, okay, fine, we've had a lot of presentations. now what we want has probably changed, and that's where the good procurement disciplines of RFI, understanding what the market capability looks like, taking the time to digest and understand that, building and coordinating what it is that you really need and want, articulating that clearly to the market, and then going through a selection process to down select to 1 or 2 providers is a time-consuming process, and I know that is a sense of frustration from the provider side, and being candid, having spent time on both sides of the fence, is frustrating for the buying organization as well. It's not dragging its heels deliberately. It's just subject to the same a similar set of challenges around move the decision-making process. So not easy, Dave.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's, it's good. with all of these things, you know, the thought that goes into a buying cycle and requirements gathering and all that kind of stuff, you know, some organizations do it well, and that will tend to lead to, I guess, a longer partnership. And then those who tend to do it less well and are less clear about their requirements, it's likely to lead to the need to be much more responsive and flexible in terms of the, you know, in terms of the future partnership. Shall I flick on to the next one? You've noticed that my machine seems to be wanting to flick on to the next one anyway, so, or back or forward. So shall we flick on to the next one for you, Joel? Yeah.
Yep. Jump in.
Can I get one more comment just to build on something that Joel said, which I think is important when he spoke about stakeholder management, internal stakeholder management. I think this is a crucial part. I spoke about the needs of buyers, but one of the problems within big corporations is that often the needs of the buyers is not necessarily the needs of the head of operation or the needs of the head of legal. So there might be internal discussions that are also pushing this into length because of different needs that appear inside the company.
Cool.
Thanks, Adrian. So I guess, you know, what you've heard there is it's difficult, it's very hard. You know, you need to be engaging early into the process. Jumping in now on how to stand out. I guess what you can see in front of you there are 3 pieces of advice that I'm going to unpack over the next couple of minutes. Finding your niche is absolutely crucial in a crowded, noisy marketplace like we have today. There are, and you know, you'll know very clearly that this is a competitive landscape. There is lots of noise in the system, and small generalists tend to get drowned out. So find what you're good at, get famous for it. So be famous for one thing, and I mean really famous for it. It's no good just saying, oh, we're great at telesales. Fine, there's a queue of people that will tell you that they're great at telesales. When I say be famous for one thing, what I mean is get awarded, get validated. You know, and again, some of these knowledge partnership sessions are going to be delivering some home truths to both sides, and that is that providers, I'm going to come on to say in a moment, are lazy, but actually buyers are lazy too. So if you can be clear on what you're amazing at, and that's validated by an external source, that gives a level of comfort to a buyer to say, okay, that's worth exploring. I'm willing to listen. So find your niche, and that requires a level of honesty within your organization about what you're good at. It requires a lot of investment in time in articulating that, and having your greatness accredited and validated. But piece of advice number 1 for standing out amongst the noise is find your niche. The second thing is around being selective for opportunities. Now, all of us, but all sides of the fence have limited resources. So my advice here is to go very hard on a narrow range of opportunities. Applying for everything is you'll win nothing. I think, you know, typically it's probably taking over 200 hours of work in my mind to do a proper response to an RFP. And that assumes you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. You know, that is, you know, a good team of people working on a response for, over a week to craft the messaging, to think deeply, not just about the win themes or competitive positioning or differentiation, but to think about what it takes to win and how you can position your organization through that. And these RFP processes are typically a learning cycle. And all too often people throw content at buyers and at RFPs. It doesn't stick, nothing resonates. Fine, okay, we'll throw it at some more people and hope it works. Maybe it was the buyer didn't listen, the buyer didn't understand, or it was predetermined. Those are lazy cop-outs for me from a provider who hasn't invested the time in properly making sure that they stand out in the process. And to stand out, you need to be, diverse. You need to be interesting, and by diverse, I don't mean racial diversity or gender diversity. I mean diversity, real diversity of thinking. three middle-aged white men shouting at each other in an echo chamber. It isn't going to, all saying how fantastic their proposal isn't going to deliver the best proposal. So make sure that you are critiquing your proposal and the opportunity that you're pitching for, so that you've got a robust and rounded proposal that's going into the buyer. That laser-like focus, I know can be exhausting, especially if you're going into new logos. The third point I was looking to land with you this morning is around nurturing your existing relationships. Sales and commission models are often skewed towards the addition of new logos, and I understand that as a business imperative. But actually building out into your existing customer base, understanding what share of your wallet, what share of their wallet you've got, what other entities they've got, can you grow vertically within their organization, i.e. that one entity or other entities they might have in a group, is different to saying, right, we're going to keep doing the same thing for lots of different companies. So that nurturing of existing relationship and exploring those adjacencies, I think for me is, gives you a powerful case study, and go looping it back around in that circular way. Once you're starting to get powerful case studies from the adjacencies, it's less of a stretch for you to then talk to a buyer, because you're great at something, you've got great case studies, and you're credible, and that gives you a much more solid foundation to be pitching into big corporates too. I don't know, maybe Dave, Adrian, any reflections on that? But for me, those three points require a level of sort of self-reflection and on the capability of you as an organization to win business. So I'm sure that will provoke some questions at the end, but I wondered if you had anything to build on in terms of that slide.
Yeah, I would like to build on your last point. I think really it's a very, very important one. And I think that the previous two, in fact, lead beautifully to the understanding. So if you have existing relationships, if you have existing customers, that means that the first things being, finding your niche and being famous for something and creating credibility, you've basically already done with this customer, because it is an existing customer that has chosen you for something, right? So therefore, I think companies often tend to put lots of effort into new business development instead of really exploring the possibilities they have with their current customers in maybe different areas of the business or different geographies of the same customer.
Okay, so I'm going to be provocative of that, guys, and I've got to say it, right? So as a put my supplier hat on, if I've got 30 to 40% of my business with one client or more, might that count against me in a procurement and sourcing cycle? So I guess there's a build the case studies and build the relationships, and obviously look to gain understanding and of how the market might operate with somebody who's a trusted friend and trusted partner. But I guess that whole kind of new logo versus existing logo, is there a downside, do you think, to that from a sourcing and procurement perspective in the longer term? So you've still got to get new logos.
Yeah, of course, Dave. And I didn't want to perhaps I overemphasize the point around the value of those existing relationships. And clearly, if you've got 40% of your business with one customer, you've got a concentration risk. Yeah. And you absolutely need to be thinking around diversification of that portfolio and getting some salespeople on board very quickly to start to transform the shape of that, the economics of your business there. From a procurement perspective, and Adrian can comment on this as well, absolutely. You don't want organizations that are too big a share of your portfolio, as well as you being too big a share of their organization. So, that scale will count against you, but it's only, and it depends on the size of the organizations. Yeah. But, once you start getting over 30%, alarm bells are going to start to ringing. But all too often I see organizations that have got 20 seats, 50 seats, 100 seats with an organization, and they're saying, oh, we're doing a great job with them. Great. Well, how many seats more could you win with that business? Well, they've got thousands and thousands doing other work. Fine. Well, concentrate, it's an easier job to turn that 100 into 500 than it is to go and win a 500 seats with a new logo. That I think was the point around it. It says nurturing there because I think exploiting or leveraging existing relationships is a little too direct and harsh.
I was gonna circle back to that to that point, which it's not about squeezing the pips and the juice out the orange. It's about making something more meaningful you as you develop your niche. So you guys comfortable if we move on to the next one? Yeah.
Yep. So here we are trying to approach, the big corporates. So I think SME suppliers, smaller suppliers, they have some obvious disadvantages versus big BPOs that have nearly unlimited resources apparently, but they also have fantastic advantages, right? So they're traditionally more innovative. There's more flexibility. There's more efficiencies. So my first suggestion would be always, be easy to do business with. At the end of the day, if you are easy to do business with and you're helpful to the buyer will recognize that, and all the other stakeholders in the company will also do. Don't try to cover everything and everywhere, right? You need to find the right entry point, the right spot, and be ready to jump on it whenever the opportunity arises. I said it before, cost is obviously important, and I'm a buyer, so I need to talk about cost in each and every conversation we have. But quality is as important as cost is. So my second suggestion would be innovative on your commercial models. Try to combine cost and quality into a commercial model that makes sense and is innovative. And this might be a way to catch the attention of the buyer, right? So at the end of the day, contacts are key, and knowing the right person to open you the door is extremely important. Now, I'm sure we will speak about this a little bit later about how to find that right person. I would just want to make one additional statement here about knocking on cold doors. Truly, I think that might have worked in the 1980s. It is not working today anymore, by own experience, right? If you receive somewhere around 100 emails a day of someone telling you how great their company is, what happens is that at the end, buyers just tend to not read those emails anymore unless they come from someone they know. So there has to be other ways to get in contact and show and demonstrate how great you are. So that leads me to the second point, right? Be great, be authentic, be helpful, be patient. That's exactly what the buyer needs. In most cases, a buyer will have dozens, if not hundreds, of suppliers. And there's always some of them that are more helpful than others, some of them that deliver more problems than others. And it's obvious that you will always go for the ones that are supporting you and helping you and getting you out of trouble versus the ones that bring more trouble to your table. So be helpful, offer out-of-the-box solutions, offer things the big BPOs will not offer. And there are things from an innovation point of view or from a flexibility point of view, right? Be fast, be at a different pace than the big corporations will be. And at the end, Dave hinted it already at the very first slide, be patient. It might take a while until all these efforts come to the right place, but at the end they will pay out. Last bullet point here is taking one step at a time. It is sometimes really, really difficult, and I recognize this. having worked nearly all my life in multinational corporations, it is difficult sometimes and frustrating to get in touch and to establish as a supplier. I guess once you are established as a supplier, things get much easier. But at the beginning, you have to go through a huge amount of legal requirements, compliance requirements, data protection requirements, tax requirements, and so on, right? A usual common contract in my company would be around 50 pages. So if you then need to go and discuss the 50 pages of the contract, it can be quite annoying, I have to say, for both parts, by the way, for the corporate and for the supplier. So my suggestion would be approach it step by step, and be sure that you have the right contact for the right part of the business. So opening the door is one thing. The buyer should be then, once you've established the right contact, the person that helps you inside, with whom you need to speak, and to bring your people in contact with the right people inside of your big corporation you want to approach. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd maybe underline that the last point a little bit there. I think that, you know, the hypothesis that smaller organizations are more agile and more innovative, I think we can debate for some time, but that's certainly my hypothesis. And I think large organizations are having now to adapt to working with smaller organizations. You know, there's this sort of corporate venture capitalist mentality of what, you know, what little organizations out there can we explore and bring into our organization to transform our product or our service capabilities. And to do that, big organizations are having to design, you know, faster ways of engaging with the market, of being, you know, of having contracts that aren't 50 pages and that take months to negotiate. Because I think, you know, it typically, people tend, in my experience, to argue the most about the clauses that are used the least. So, you know, insurances and protections are all very important in the process, but they're the absolute last resort. So I think the need to be patient in facing off into bigger corporations is absolute. And I just wanted to underline that point. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that big corporates are trying to get faster, and, you know, smaller hungry organizations that need to work through those processes, it will take time for both sides. So as you said, a lot of these points reinforce themselves. Being helpful and patient, similarly, that's not to say roll over during the process and sign a bad deal, but just keep in mind that that big buying organization is trying to protect itself against a series of risks. You don't necessarily, you know, you can be provocative in that debate around the likelihood of those happening, and don't be difficult to negotiate with, because the buying organization typically has a lot of alternatives.
Right. And you have, sorry.
So that's a great segue, guys, into the next one, which is about, you know, bringing in partnerships, Joel, because you're talking about risks and material.
Well, let's jump to that, shall we? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll flick into, if I can get that to move on. There we go.
Well, it's perfectly pointed out, Dave. It's a lovely segue, actually, because I think taking risks to further growth, and you'll see 3 points on the page there. That top one absolutely echoes what we were just saying, and that's that most businesses are run by good, fair people. You know, most buyers are great people. They're humans too. So there needs to be a level of trust established between those two, that, you know, then the transaction cost economics lower, then the costs of that relationship lower. If you can have an honest and open conversation with a buyer, then it's much easier to start the contracting process and to get into the buying cycle initially. But to do that, you need to be taking some risks. And I think most of the pitches I see that fail are when providers are trying to shift the risk onto the buyer. And there's no reason for the buyer really to take risks. They have a lot of opportunities. They have a lot of alternatives. They need security of supply. As a provider, you're looking to make margin from that relationship, and as a good buyer, you want your ecosystem to be making, you want your provider network to be making margin. You need a healthy supplier base that is making money, but that money is a reward for the risks that you've taken. So I always correlate margin with the risks that you're taking. So I really do think that you need to start thinking around the risks that you're taking and being bold in the partnerships around what you're prepared to take on. You also though need to be honest with yourself and your customers around what you can and can't do. Because I think there's a level of honesty missing sometimes in some of the pitches that I see where really you haven't got the capability. You might want the logo, but that doesn't mean that you've got the capability that suits or is needed by that buying organization. And that's where the third theme starts to come through now, which and I think we all see this. There's two distinct things happening in the industry, I think, at the moment. The first is around consolidation and bigger organizations buying smaller organizations. There's a long track record, over the last few years of that happening. Money is cheap at the moment. Exchange rates are moving in some directions, and that makes consolidation in the market happen. That means the bigger organizations are getting bigger, and then for the role of smaller organizations has a question mark next to it. And that's where exploring collaboration for me is the next frontier for smaller providers. How can you be participating in ecosystems of providers to allow you to take on bigger opportunities? So it might be a 1,000-seat deal into South Africa that maybe only a small handful of providers could accommodate, but actually there are organizations now that can, like TKG, that can facilitate the collaboration of smaller partners to choreograph a series of smaller providers into one solution. And therefore, don't always think about competing with the usual suspects. Start to think now around, is collaboration the best way forward rather than competition? Because there are countless examples of where collaboration has unlocked much greater opportunity for the buyer and the provider than a straightforward shootout where there's only one winner. So I would encourage you, and if you're looking to grow those partnerships, take the risks, be honest with yourself, and think about doing it in different ways, particularly around collaboration, to take that opportunities on. It allows you to unlock much bigger opportunities that you can participate in.
Yeah, I would like to build on two points if I quickly can. So in regards to being honest to your customer and to yourself, I think that's a key. It's a key statement, right? There's many providers that tend to say yes to everything, which is extremely helpful during the negotiation, but is extremely unpleasant once you start to work together and it comes out that obviously not everything you said yes to you can fulfill. So at the end, the credibility you lose is worse than if you would have said, I can't do that, or we can't offer that service, right? There will be someone else that can, and it's just much more painful. So be honest, I would say, is a very strong statement. And in regards to the collaboration you were saying, 100%, I couldn't emphasize more on it. There's so much more to gain if you collaborate with the right people more than spend time fighting against them. Also, by the way, key with your customer, right? We always say partnership, but in reality, 90% of the providers are suppliers. Everyone calls them partners because it sounds nicer, but the reality is we have 10% partners and 90% suppliers. So be one of the partners is my suggestion, because that doesn't go with size. It just goes with how good you are.
Yep. Great
way to wrap up that point on, and just in terms of partnership. So look, guys, thanks for that. I think I know we've got some questions that have been posed by some folks that weren't able to attend today. So I think we've got some of those as as leaders. I've seen that we've got some questions in both Q&A and in chat, so we'll come to those and hopefully start to stimulate a bit of a debate in terms of the masterclass. So I think just for me, I guess the kind of the summary point really was, look, for getting into the cycle and getting into a position where you can start to build a partnership, it really is about making sure that you invest properly in understanding the buyer. And what the buyer is needing. It's not always as transparent, and as Joel pointed out, quite a lot of the times, buyers don't really know what they want. So just investing in making sure and learning about the process and the frailties within the process. I think we then started to get into, well, look, how do you attract attention? How do you stand out? So that really was about focus, about being fresh thinking and being provocative and challenging and being able to, to kind of stand out, make sure that you're different. So I think that whole kind of, I guess, putting learning and fresh thinking in combination is a way of making sure that as a smaller provider, you're able to launch on that. Now, I think when we start to get into, kind of the engagement, the clear message, I think, from the point of view of partnership was around collaboration. So this is, making sure that, you're not in a long list of folks in an inbox and are discounted. So, just making sure that, I guess, that the content is relevant around the collaboration. And I think, as very succinctly pointed out by both Adrian and Joel, being honest with yourself and honest with the client, that level of transparency and openness is critical in any sourcing process, because once you're in the relationship, constantly saying yes and not being able to deliver is always going to be a problem. So look, well, thanks both guys. So we're going to turn over now to the folks who've been very patiently and diligently listening to the content. So if it's okay, I'm going to start with the questions that were posed before, he says, and it won't flick down. So there we go. So Joel, can I, you know and love South Africa well. So now can I throw the first question to you, which is, what do you think would, from a buyer perspective, would draw people not to the bigger guys? We're not talking about those big global brands, but really the smaller providers who might be kind of reaping the benefit of the halo that's coming from South Africa being the most favoured destination for the second year running.
Great question, Dave. I don't know where that question came in from, but it really is a smart one. For me, I first moved work down into Cape Town in 2002, so that ages me a little bit, perhaps. But South Africa has been a fantastic delivery platform for much of the last 20 years. I think, if we're honest, it hasn't always scaled as quickly as it could have done. And I think now with the work of BPESA and the master plan, we're starting to see a really solid plan that will help lift more people into work. Because for me, South Africa is a tremendous location for a range of services, particularly voice customer care, telesales and other activities clearly work really well as well there. And your question around what's attracting buyers there and into the smaller providers, I think South Africa, if you can get someone to South Africa, it often sells itself. The energy of the people, the enthusiasm, the empathy, the rapport they're able to build with customers. In terms of selling into the UK, very little time difference, well connected, cultural alignment, all of those things that sort of are in the sweet spot between UK and South Africa. And from the US into South Africa, and clearly the US is a big source target market. Frankly, South Africa isn't the Philippines and India, and those are good locations in themselves. But people from a procurement perspective are designing sources strategies now that are lower in risk, and people clearly over the last few years have become much more interested in the complexities in the supply chain, and having a portfolio of providers in a range of locations de-risks your service delivery footprint materially. In terms of the specific attraction into smaller providers, I think there is a very entrepreneurial outlook across South Africa. So if we look at the participants on this call, I think that, there's over 30 people represented on this call now from a range of really innovative businesses. So that entrepreneurial startup organizations are finding their feet and are winning work on the basis that South Africa is a fantastic platform. They tend to be winning work instead of into the bigger providers because of some of the things we've talked about today. Agility, the buyers are looking to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond so that they can more easily influence the direction and that business is going. There are counterpoints to that, and sometimes organizations want to move into bigger organizations because, and if we think about why, it's that they are sometimes perceived to be lower risk. If I buy from X or Y, that the names we all know, there's a level of comfort that comes with that because you've got some sense of security, but actually the outcomes don't necessarily have to be very different between a bigger provider and a smaller provider. So my message to the smaller providers looking to win more work out of either of those source destinations is get the buyers in front of you, get them into your operations, help them understand the culture and the dynamics of the people. The platform in terms of South Africa itself, I think sells itself brilliantly, and it's well marketed, but it requires all of the things that we've touched on today around honesty and integrity, and if you can be those things, you'll certainly bring work into your SME businesses in South Africa.
Yeah. Adrian, I think you want to add anything just in terms of the kind of the South, rather than the I guess the smaller suppliers, the South Africa as a potential destination in the context of what you're seeing in other geographies that are obviously competing for that that share of the outsource market.
Yeah, I've been in the lucky position to do this for quite a while now, and I have to say, and I mentioned this briefly when we met last time, I've never heard so much talking about South Africa than in the last 6 to 8 months, maybe. So yes, there was always the knowledge that there is a location there and that there's possibilities there. But it really has increased massively over the last, let's say, 8 months or so, which I think is very, very good. As we said before during the chat, that big corporations are not necessarily known for being fast movers always. So it takes some time until this all resonates and decision is being taken, and therefore, I think we will see the results relatively soon now of more big corporations coming to South Africa. I had the pleasure to be there recently for the first time in my life. I was super positively impressed, I have to say, not only by the people, which I think is really the biggest asset, but also by the infrastructure. By the concept of impact sourcing, by many other things I've seen that have changed my personal opinion, maybe, which was not a bad opinion before. It was just not having the details or the knowledge to think it is really the right place to go.
Yeah, good. I think. Well, look, I'll just I'll just, if I may, just provide, I guess, a bit for perspective for me. I think the guys in the team at BPESA are doing an absolutely awesome job of corralling the industry and presenting a consistent value proposition out into the marketplace, and have been doing so for a number of years. I think the accolade of being the most favoured nation in 2021 was both a blessing and, in the same way, probably with people's inability to travel, also a curse, because you win the most favoured nation, and and sadly most organisations, particularly corporates, because of the pandemic, were not allowing travel. So it was fantastic that that South Africa got that award again for 2022 as obviously travel relaxes. So I think, from my perspective, I think similarly, Adrian, that kind of momentum, it does take, as you rightly say, time to build, and that demand side interest is there, which is it's that fantastic news for those guys who are on the call today. It's just about now, if the demand is there, is making sure that the supply side is able to meet that demand in a way that it's effective, that we can capture it when we're trying to compete from a South Africa perspective with the other 150 other choices for for English speaking market around the world, where very often cost is to their advantage because the market is less mature. So thanks guys for both on that. I think it's great to South Africa. Just on a quick one, Joel, you talked about risk, and I think there are two. I guess there are two halves to this question, which is one is about risk and the quantification of risk, and the second half of the question, which is more important for this audience, is in the context of smaller providers. So if you could just, from a sourcing perspective, give just a quick view on aligning risk, I guess we come back to some of the points around scale and stuff, just with the context of our audience today in terms of the smaller providers.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think for me, the principal risk associated with a smaller provider is, what if the salesman's wrong? What if I'm wrong as a buyer? What if the fantastic sales slides and the wonderful site visit don't translate into the service execution that I was expecting? And the principal risk in the smaller providers is the bandwidth to recover that quickly. So the ramp up and growth of any campaign or change to an existing process is rarely a straight line. There will always be bumps in the road, and larger organizations can sometimes be better at accommodating those bumps in the road. They move their crisis management team from one failing account to another. So I think the principal risk for me is around that customer experience, and that manifests itself in lots of different ways, schedule adherence, NPS, lots of different KPIs. So the principal risk with a smaller provider is, I don't know them, they haven't got a track record, they haven't been validated by anyone else. So again, going back to some of those home truths about lazy salespeople who are regurgitating the same response to every RFP, buyers are equally lazy at times and look to other organizations to have done some of that due diligence for them. So, okay, well, it's safe for me to use, this supplier because big brands A, B, and C are using them, therefore they must have been qualified as okay. That doesn't happen as often in the smaller providers, because by nature they've got less customers. So the risks around service delivery and service execution for me are greater in a smaller provider, and are why the smaller providers need to be more aggressive and more proactive in terms of being prepared to take the risk. Because to say, I'm a small provider, give me 150 seats and I'll do a great job, is a risk for a buyer to take. Actually, if you say, you know what, and I've moved work offshore in this way before, which is to say, you might have other lower cost destinations. If I'm worse than them, why should I expect you to pay more than them? I'm telling you I'm better, and I'm prepared to back that. So you need some bold claims that you're prepared to underwrite contractually to start to mitigate those risks in the buyer's minds. Yeah.
I think, obviously from that perspective, that whole kind of backing, come back in, to the point, I guess, for the audience is really, it's about being and having the confidence, isn't it? It's a word that I'm, in summarizing what I was saying before, it's about confidence as well, isn't it? Because, the kind of the price quality equation, how do you do that? Well, you really have got to back yourselves occasionally just to push the point, to prove that, that you're obviously committed to partnership, which is a longer term aim and not just a transaction. I'm not just here to take those FTE and those seats or whatever whatever project comes your way. So that was good. I think I guess the next question really just in terms of collaboration, and I think this one really for Adrian, the point around onshore. So this is, I guess, the question here in the context, and I'm guessing how this is posed. This is collaboration. I'm working on a supplier from South Africa. So somebody who's in the marketplace in South Africa, partnering with an organization in the source market or collaborating with an organization in the source market. Is that something that you're seeing as a route for people to approach, where your organization as a big corporate, as a way of, dealing with, some of the challenges that are being faced from a macro procurement perspective?
Yeah, I think, it's a very good question. I do think, and if I may, I will tie it back to the previous one. So the uncertainty is one of the big problems, right? What are the risks associated was the previous one. Well, uncertainty is one of them. If you don't know the person or the company you're partnering with, that makes things just much more complicated, even more when it is offshore, where operations often have the feel that they lose power over the operation. So therefore, does a collaboration really work? I think it does. I think it does in the sense that people that are on the ground and know the business can just build up this from a completely different point of view than someone that is sitting in a location that is 10,000 kilometers away potentially. Now, on the other hand, that person or that other party that is sitting in the source market 10,000 kilometers away has advantages the provider on the ground might not yet have, which is already opened the door, has the trust of the buyer, has maybe a signed agreement already, etc.
Yeah. So I think, it's about access, isn't it? I mean, that's the principal thing.
Correct.
So look, I think we've got, we're blessed with quite a few questions and a few minutes to get to them. So I'm going to limit now. So from a Q&A perspective, we'll just go. We'll do tagging. So I'll choose my compares privilege. Some very good questions, which I'll go. So I've got a question from Rodney, which I'll throw into you, Joel. So can you please comment on the current marketplace in the UK, US for the SME outsourcer base in SA, in South Africa, and how might the SMEs in South Africa take advantage of the dynamics in current marketplace? I guess it builds off Adrian's last point.
Yeah, I think so. And good morning, Rodney. I hope you're well. I break that into. I try not to repeat what Adrian said, and we'll try and keep this succinct so we can get through questions. The first point around the current marketplace in the UK and US, both of those markets have got a war on talent. They are suffering, huge inflation. UK is set to hit 10% inflation in the next few months. That's starting to, the cost of living squeeze, fueled by, but be that without making political points, Brexit or the tragic sort of events in the Ukraine are creating massive inflationary pressures in the UK and to some extent in the USA as well. So the discussion now around managing a cost envelope as a director of service is causing me to look at markets I might not otherwise have looked at. And typically, the Americans have looked to the Philippines and the UK has looked to sort of India and South Africa. But I think, as we touched on earlier, buyers are looking to diversify that service delivery portfolio a little bit. And I think now again, without repeating, what Dave said around some of the accolades that South Africa has been winning of late, I think it's absolutely a great time to be a SME provider in South Africa. I think the challenge, Rodney, is coming into the second half of your question, is around how to take advantage of that. Now, hopefully some of that will have come through in the answers that we've given today around being targeted, being laser-like, being honest with yourself, having a diversity of thinking and investing the time in a narrow range of opportunities rather than just plastering the same response to everyone. And because I think, if your buyers, to Adrian's point, are getting, inundated with sort of what's the word, with requests for, can we talk, can we engage, but they haven't done their depth of research. So I think in terms of taking advantage of that, I would probably take the pack from this session, print it, do it digitally as you wish, but go through point by point and think and ask yourself honestly, okay, what can I do differently against getting into the buying cycle? What can I do differently in terms of standing out? And it's that internal conversation or that conversation with your management team, Rodney, and others, that I think will start to transform the business. There are other ways of taking advantage of that, because sometimes the SMEs don't have a voice. They're not at the table in the UK or the US. So that, and without recruiting sales teams in those markets, or engaging brokerages where you're having to surrender significant shares of the fee, or that's been passed on to the buyer, there are other organizations like TKG that can help to introduce opportunities to that SME marketplace. And that plays to the collaboration point I tried to make, which is, don't always see it as a competition. How can you collaborate to exploit the opportunities coming out of the UK and the US? Because competing on your own, as you've probably sensed through this webinar, it is difficult. So I would that would be my answer, Rodney.
Great stuff. Thanks, Joel. So I hope I'm going to say Kashika's name correctly. So we have a question from Kashika, which is about coming back to channel, which I'm going to give to Adrian, who's probably going to have the most full inbox in terms of his Outlook or whatever other application you might be using for your inbox. So finding the right channel. What are your thoughts about using LinkedIn for targeting specific buyer profiles and or getting in front of the right person? So solicitation for, I guess, new business and building relationships on LinkedIn, Adrian. So your views on that?
Well, I can only give my personal view on that.
Oh, that's it. That's all we want.
It has been very, very few times, honestly, that I've received a LinkedIn invite that really kind of blew my mind. So my point is, be authentic, like we said before. Don't just drop an email because someone is global buyer or whatever and tell him, I have this great company, I would like to work for you or with you. Be authentic, make a proposal, surprise the buyer, tell him, try to find out or try to think what his or her need can be. And give him an offer on, I can do this for you, but we can do it in this form. And I thought this might be an advantage. And then you get the attention, and then you will end up having a good contact. If it's just I'm working for company ABC, I would like to talk to you. Well, it's just not enough, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's like any channel, isn't it? As long as it's used
right
in the right way.
Right.
I'm still from the 80s, Adrian. So cold calling and phoning people is still, it's still tough.
And meeting them at fairs.
Yeah.
Fairs are great. I love fairs.
And look, and Google's as good a source as LinkedIn for getting, people's contact details. So there are obviously other channels available, but there we go. Joel, a question actually from Tracy, which is quite an interesting one from the point of view of how do the smaller providers get that kind of, I guess, quantitative point around the verification that they can deliver to a larger global client? So just in terms of that sourcing process.
Really good question, Tracy. And I don't want to and I'm not going to try and turn this answer into an advert for TKG, but I think there are a range of standards bodies that can support the verification or the certification of you as a provider. COPC, big global standard, have got, you know, the trilogy of, you know, running your own, outsourcing it, and being a provider. So the COPC, ISO, there are a range of sort of verification bodies that can come in, but they tend to be expensive, time consuming, and they take a significant investment. But there are other organizations, and we've talked a little bit now around, you know, earlier in the session around, Dave opened up with around what TKG are doing. The TKG organization are collecting significant amounts of RFI responses from the provider ecosystems across the UK and South Africa. Those data points are encrypted and stored securely by us and then applied into digital sourcing events. But there also, of course, requires a level of validation of those. And I clearly, you know, I joined Dave and Spencer to help build TKG because I absolutely believe in the vision that TKG is looking to create, and the business that TKG is looking to create, which is to create a platform for smaller providers to access larger opportunities. That democratization of the sourcing event, of the sourcing process, for me is life-changing, right? You know, I've spent a long time buying from the same people time and again, and I think there are better ways of doing that. And working with smaller providers is, I think, much more impactful personally and professionally. And I think, you know, Adrian touched a little bit on impact sourcing. So investing the time as an experienced buyer to help develop the capability of smaller organizations, I think is much more rewarding, and I think unlocks a different level of partnership and performance. In terms of the trust factor and de-risking it, as we said, you know, things like verification via you know, the TKG's accreditation process, you know, the gbs.world website, people will see out there in the marketplace as a platform for a transparent marketplace for the you know, awareness of different providers. There are different stages within that ecosystem that allow you to go through, you know, verified means I've been assessed against this narrow range of criteria, right the way up to a full certification, which does, you know, reflect more like some of those larger organizational audits, and be those ISO or others, etc. So, you know, we're looking within TKG to create that collection of verified, certified smaller providers that are capable of supporting bigger opportunities.
And I'll go back to my dating app analogy. Yeah. So you're much more successful on dating apps if you're in control and building your own profile rather than, you know, relying on third-party testament. You don't want an ex-partner saying what a great lover you were on Badoo or any of these. You don't look for those kind of references. It's really you being in control of what you're saying. So we've got a very specific question from Claiborne from DefTouch, which is a startup in South Africa. I think understating that it's a transformational BPO provider, principally focused on dealing with the needs of the deaf community. So Joel, I just think, you know, you referenced diversity earlier. I think, you know, whether this is one that you want to answer now, or whether this is one maybe you could take offline with Claiborne, just in terms of the TKG conversation. But, you know, it's being able to, you know, kind of challenge the status quo in terms of positioning the business as a startup with very, very specific, clearly very specific niche needs into the B2B and B2G market. So have you got any comments on that, or, you know, is this something for maybe a follow-up post this masterclass?
So Claiborne, thanks for the comment. I'd happily have a follow-up. I'm not an expert on the product, on the, you know, services for the deaf, but I would gladly share my time and energy and to help in a conversation as a follow-up to this. I think you can get in touch with TKG and on LinkedIn, however you wish. I think the more rounded answer, so the less specific answer, is that in the old days it was around price and quality, and I think what South Africa's done differently in pioneering the narrative around impact sourcing and using the investments into a country to help transform lives is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it as a location, and why I'm so supportive of BPESA's mission. I think that is starting to echo internationally now, and I think some of the ESG themes that buyers are now starting to be concerned with just weren't on the radar a few years ago. Before, how much are you? These are my requirements. What's the price? What's the quality? Fine, sign here. I think some of those themes around environmental considerations, but certainly a lot more of the social considerations are coming through now in terms of diversity, inclusion, opportunities for all. So again, that the onboarding into the TKG ecosystem does go through a huge sort of ESG section, so that we're building up a portfolio of what we think great ESG aligned suppliers look like, because buyers are increasingly starting to look for that as one of their key criteria, not just who's the best or who's the cheapest or who's available. They're looking to be more impactful, and Claiborne, I'd love a chat about how I can help in that regard.
Stuff. So I think we're at the top of the time in terms of, I guess, bringing matters to a close. So hopefully, we've managed to get through quite a lot of questions and dealt with some maybe some provocative points about how good buyers are in the context of how good sellers are. That's that's a big reveal for me. Hey, so the buyer. There was this old thing, wasn't there, that the buyer is always right or the customer is always right, but clearly, we can make it that the supplier might be right too. So look, I think thank you everybody for taking part. I'd like to make it, on behalf of TKG, a particular thanks. There's obviously with these programs, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background. But I'd like to thank Joel and Adrian for your contributions today. So thank you for giving your time, both from Sunny Lux. Particular shout out and thanks to Tracy, to Natasha, to Eloise and Charlotte, who've organised us all and made today possible. And particular thanks to BPESA. Now, just I guess from my perspective, and just in terms of if you do want to get in touch, if there are anything that has not been answered to your satisfaction today, or if you go away, you've made some notes, or you look at the content in the future, then please reach out to us on the website that you've got there, the email address that you've got there, not the website. hello@welovetoknow.com. We do love to know. Please provide and post any questions to us there. So I think I'm now handing over to Tracy, who's going to bring the whole event to a close. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you, Joel. Thank you, Adrian. I think that is fantastic, and it's really a great opportunity for the community to start sort of unpacking all of this. Just quickly in summary, a couple of the key points that I personally pulled out. So a wealth of information was shared from everyone, but the biggest takeaways is people do business, nurture relationships. The opportunity to pitch for an RFQ starts at least 18 months before the opportunity actually arises to submit. South Africa, thankfully, has been seen within the global buyers community now more than ever it was before. And it's our opportunity as a collective industry to really grab this opportunity. The biggest points that are coming out as South Africa's ability to support and service is looking at our talent pool, our beautiful talent pool that we have, our people, our robust infrastructure, and then very specifically, and this was one of the last points you closed on, is the ability for South Africa to support social impact. And it's really in the South African DNA. We are, for those that are not aware, actually seen as a center of excellence for impact sourcing globally. And this speaks directly through to the diversity and inclusion and the ESG focus that our source markets have at the moment. Buyers are looking to diversify and risk mitigate geographies and suppliers. So again, it goes back to why South Africa. Skill shortages in the source markets are forcing buyers to consider alternate locations. And again, we can respond appropriately to that. Stick to your knitting, know what it is that you do, your niche focus, and learn to articulate that well. Be agile, be focused, and be honest. And that is both to yourselves internally, so a bit of introspection, but then also to the clients. And it did make me giggle a little bit because I know that Richard Branson always suggests fake it till you make it, but possibly in this case, it's not always the way to go. So just an element of faking it, but honesty is critical. And then looking at the verification piece. So Joel mentioned a couple of different focus areas, just to use this opportunity to say that for those that are not aware, BPESA has been very involved in the ISO process. So we have local South African standards that we created, but then South Africa is actually the convener for the creation of the ISO 18295 parts 1 and 2 that were released as the customer contact center service standards. So, you know, South Africa being the convener there, we would like to see more organizations actually having that ISO service standard in place. But over and above that, the opportunity to have that verification or certification through global sourcing platforms like gbs.world is really the way to go. It gives you that element of credibility that was requested. And then just to stay in touch, thank you, Dave, on the closing page here is the email address that you can all respond to or engage with. But over and above that, if you're not already following TKG and BPESA on Twitter and LinkedIn, there's lots of nuggets of information that's constantly shared off of those platforms. So please do go and follow those. This was really the start of a longer conversation. And the idea is to have conversations, which we know we're good at from a South African perspective. But the next masterclass is going to be succeeding within the GBS sector. So we obviously know that you're interested in the series. So we'll definitely be communicating to you on when those are. It's probably the next one's going to be around August. In the meantime, feel free to reach out. Any challenges you have, any great case studies that you want to sort of unpack to say, we did this, it worked, we did this, it didn't work. This is all about co-creating together. And TKG will sort of lead the pack with that, but we really are looking for this to be a collaborative experience so that everyone can feed into it. But to make sure that we are hitting the right sweet spots for you, we will be sending a survey out to you so that we can improve the series to make sure that we really are targeting the areas that you want to know about. And we will be sharing this recording with all of our participants and any of your colleagues who didn't manage to make it today. Then just probably in closing, the final piece, just to let you know that we did this time allow for non-BPESA members to join the session, but going forward, it will be BPESA members only. So if you haven't actually signed up with BPESA yet as a member, please do so now. You can get hold of any one of the BPESA team. And we will gladly support getting you on board and getting you as part of the community, which in itself offers an element of certification, showing that you are part of the Global Business Services South Africa community. So on that note, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Adrian, Joel, Dave, thank you. Behind the scenes, Charlotte, Eloise, Natasha, thank you very much. And really excited about this conversation moving forward and looking forward to the next one. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.